Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new edition of the show that is called Strange Times. I'm your host, Leopoldo Perez Obregón, and as always, here we bring scholars and people working with policy to discuss what they are confused about. And then we talk about the topics that I'm confused about the things that my guests know very well. And what is even more confusing than taxes? Well, there are lots of things to think in this regard, so we brought Giammarco Cottani. Giammarco, welcome to Strange Times. You are a consultant in tax, and you are also a professor at the UI, delivering executive training courses. And we can start with the question that we always use in this show, which is, what are you confused about?
Thank you. First of all, good morning. Good to be with you virtually, and thank you, Leopoldo, for the invite. It's a great question, a difficult one. So what I'm most confused about these days is, I think, how we try to make things difficult in different domains. Mm-hmm. And if I look at it in tax, we have these rules that have been existing for more than, I would say, 100 years, 120 years. Mm-hmm. And still, while we try to come up with new rules to get more taxes, still sometimes we disagree on some of the basics that then, people need to focus on to understand why we use taxes. So taxes are needed in order to guarantee public services, hospitals, roads, safety. So there is certainly a need, but maybe we are in a scenario where we are putting on steroids sometimes production, where sometimes it would be good to pause for a moment and meditate and say, okay, this is where we really need to put our efforts. So we are going to discuss that, but sometimes I think we try to make things too complicated, more than they already are, when sometimes it would be good to just pause.
The thing with these debates about things being hard, Gianmarco, it's also happening in the banking domain, which is my field of expertise, of course. And sometimes this discussion about simplifications, of course, there are things that are very complex, like banking management risk is highly full of rules. Some of them are useful, though. But when bankers talk about simplification, I'm always afraid. I always check my pocket if my wallet is still there, Yeah, okay. And do you think we have too complex rules for taxes for the regular fellow or for everybody? Where do you see this complexity happening?
Well, I think, sometimes when you talk about tax, we never have to take the topic in isolation, right? So tax has to be part of a broader social economic policy that needs to be taking place at global level, at regional level, and at country level. So we live in times where, for instance, the discrepancy between where wealth is concentrated within individuals as opposed to where production is generated is very wide. So we live in times where people that try to start a business, sometimes they need to move difficultly in a maze of rules, whereas sometimes also multinational groups that tend to generate a lot of businesses try to be, I would say, vilified, sometimes rightly, most of the times without really actual knowledge, just because, let's say, if you mention, let's say, some big corporate names that can get an easy clickbait article, people tend to go hard on those. So there have been some topics that people have been talking without really going into the real detail of it. So to give you a concrete example, companies do pay a lot of taxes. And sometimes the big names in the tech world, in the entertainment world, sometimes are put just out there, because there is obviously an interest to call them out. But if you look at the actual money collection, how much money they pay in taxes, VAT, direct taxes, total tax contribution are pretty material. Still, is never enough. So do we have a problem? I think there is a perception problem, and then there is also an enforcement problem. So once you get all this money, then what you do with it? So I think this is where, I think, to your banking word, people call for simplification, but sometimes in order to simplify, I need to produce more rules rather than simplifying. Maybe I'm just creating a bigger problem. And this is sometimes, these are the current times that we are living, I think.
I think it's very difficult to persuade people that big tech is paying very little taxes, especially when we see, for example, reports that Jeff Bezos or people like that, sometimes their tax declarations are not compatible with the billionaire or trillionaires that they are.
I think we need to make a clear distinction, right? So what is personal income tax? So what, let's say, ultra billionaires, you mentioned Jeff Bezos, but there are thousands still out there that where sometimes wealth is concentrated is really determining sometimes the word and what the companies that are created by the activities of these people are actually doing. So I think sometimes, again, the conversation in the public domain gets convoluted. I think that obviously there are some mechanisms out there that allow these people, also because they have access to good tax advice, to lower their tax bill. But I think what you're hinting at, and I think what the society are hinting at nowadays, and this is also something that we try to discuss in our training program here at UI, is what fairness means, what tax fairness is. And fairness can have different meanings. There is a social component, but there is also a technical component. So for a multinational group, I had the pleasure to work in a couple of large tech companies before. I think be fair means comply with the law. Then in this concept of compliance, there is a significant spectrum about being over-compliant or just stay within the boundaries of the law. I can tell you that based on my personal experience, it's very, very difficult to win every debate in the public opinion around fairness on taxes. Because if you mentioned Jeff Bezos, if Jeff Bezos goes out there, for example, and say, yeah, look, I'm paying $1 billion in US taxes, there would be some politician out there, regardless of if you're a Republican or a Democrat or somewhere in Europe that says, no, this is not enough. This is not enough. And I think this is where I think the boundaries need that require a little bit more of a careful thinking. That's why I said maybe rather than jumping and say this is not enough or this is too much, let's pause and see whether these rules work or not.
You know, the question, of course, you say what is fair is what is compliant with the law, but also many people will feel that the system is rigged because these big techs can contribute endlessly to political campaigns. Probably it is different in Europe, and that's where the nuances step in. But I think that probably we could take a step back because it's also useful to understand what you do. What does a tax advisor do? Because I think, Gianmarco, that, for example, you travel more than the average ambassador. And it's not the idea that somebody has of a tax advisor, like somebody in an office, like doing paperwork. What is your everyday life? How does it look like?
My everyday life?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I can tell you personally, you know, I started my law firm, and I know we have two offices. And the name of the firm is Noema Global, and global is not just by chance. We have two offices, one in Amsterdam, one in Abu Dhabi. But to your point, why do I travel that much? Is because indeed rules are getting standardized, and we cannot afford nowadays, neither as advisors nor as a company, to stay stick into one single place. So, for example, international tax rules with some nuances can apply more or less the same in Argentina, in Mexico, or in Thailand, or in the United Arab Emirates. So there is a common standardized approach that we can help, but also as a tax advisor, we cannot do anything meaningful without having the overall holistic picture. So this means there are regulatory consideration, banking consideration, corporate law considerations that obviously myself I cannot do. Still, when it comes to tax, we can try to put the pieces together. So my ordinary day, first and foremost, I try to to wake up and do some exercise.
Okay.
And
That's
then
important.
That's important. I would advise everyone: don't forget to do your exercise, eat well, and then jokes apart. And most of my days calls, meetings, and then the day flies away. But that's basically it.
Okay, I will follow up, but I will remove that chair in the back because it's bothering me. I just noticed it.
Okay.
Now the stream looks better and I can relax.
Of course.
Gianmarco, and what do you do when, for example, a client comes and requests you a very aggressive tax scheme and it says you, do you often have to moderate requests from clients?
I would not say often, but obviously, again, as a tax advisor, I started my career in an international organization, then I proudly served my country, Italy, within the Italian tax authorities for almost 5 years. So when a client comes in with something that looks aggressive, obviously we try to bring them back, because of course as an advisor you always need to have certain standards of integrity that I cannot compromise. Because obviously, you know, you have one face, you have face not only towards your client but also towards your broader stakeholders like the government. So if someone comes in and say, look, can you make this move and you know, stash my money in a dodgy place, the answer would say, yeah, if you do it, these are the consequences. So obviously there is also I would say compass, my value of compass that says, no, I don't do it. There is also another component that morale, I think, like fairness, is very subjective. What is fair to you is not necessarily fair to me, depending on our line of values. But here we have the compass of the law. So I always, whatever the client, one of the questions I always ask him is, what's your appetite to risk? Because risk, especially for wealthy people or wealthy companies, can be exposure to material financial liability and reputational exposure, which is also something that you, if you want to do your job well, you always need to take into account. But this also goes in the way you bring up yourself into your day-to-day activity. Even in, you know, here at the EY, it's the same.
I mean, there's always the debate of whether lawyers are a gun for hire, correct? So if somebody can request you anything, what do you do with a loophole, for example, in the tax that nobody realized yet? Do you use it?
To me, the number one thing is not violating the law. So this is key. This is key. Then there are those that, again, if their moral integrity bar is lower than mine, they would say, let's go for it. Because I think, it goes back into the times, and I don't want to sound too philosophical, but I think it's also important to understand why sometimes tax is also very important. That it's not that if you come to me and say, hey, can you help me moving this uranium substance to build a nuclear weapon, I pay you $1 million, I would say yes.
Yeah.
I think sometimes there are elements that just...
I mean, but I guess you always have to walk this line, correct? It's
yes,
a constant exercise, I imagine.
But isn't it an exercise that you do also in life? I also think that
I think a tax advisor needs to have those calls more often.
Yeah, that's true. And and there is also another element that generally conversation can get tough, especially because, unfortunately, most of the time this conversation revolves around money. And when there is money in the conversation, things get, by default, always more tense. I'm a person that I have a very weird relationship with money. Of course, money is important. Everyone thinks, of course, you need to have money in order to live your life the way you want it. But on the other end, I think it's also, again, where does your limit start? So I think also there is a little bit of a concept, I don't know if this has been some streaming series that may a little bit vilified the concept of the aggressive, nasty lawyer with the striped suit that goes around and whatever to just bring money home. I think it's, having an understanding of your legal system, including your tax rules, is very, very important, because that also gives you a proper understanding on how a country thinks and where the world is going. For example, the whole conversation that now we are having around taxing the digital economy, right? Which is also one of the other topics that we often discuss in our training. I think there the question is, what are the benefits that these companies are bringing, as opposed to how much taxes then they leave in the country? This is the huge debate that now is going on since the last 13 years, and still we don't find an answer, because there is political friction. And sometimes, so as my job is, and our job here, especially at the UI, is, as technicians, we look at policy solutions. But people sometimes overlook the fact that policy solutions are the, I would say, result of political decisions. And you know this better than me. I think we're living extraordinarily challenging times in terms of political confrontation that makes, therefore, our work as technicians more difficult.
And it makes the argument about the fairness of the law also tougher. But before going there, because again, we need to keep understanding a bit the structure of these things before getting entangled in an abstract debate. So how would you explain the way in which we coordinate taxes worldwide? You just mentioned that your firm is global because the activities that necessarily are involved with taxation are global, but there's a cobweb of regulations at different levels and jurisdictions. What are the main infrastructure that we are dealing with?
So I think in terms of standardization, I think it's interesting to look back from a historical standpoint about what happened with, for instance, in 2008 when we had the financial crisis. Back then, of course, states, countries, as you remember, with the Lehman Brothers collapse, the governments have to start to bail out banks. And the key issues was, okay, then we need to tighten a little bit the belt here and try to get more tax collection. So we started with exchange of information for tax purposes. So bank secrecy came away. So everything around information, of exchange of information for tax purposes now became the standard. And then we focus on the corporate world, understanding where large multinational groups pay enough taxes in the countries where they generate value. So this concept of value creation then started to pop up.
Okay.
And also, and I think this is where the infrastructure still tend to be a little bit uneven. Countries tend to respond to this differently. For example, in 1920s, 1930s, after the First World War, the international tax rule was drafted for the first time. So when we had brick and mortar businesses, but now we are in an era of artificial intelligence, where you don't need to be physically present in a market in order to run your business in that market, because you can do that digitally. So how do I do that? I need then to adjust the rules. And for this I would say for this adjustment exercise, that you have countries that tend to respond differently to that.
But we have normally treaties, we have international organization. What is the institutional setting, let's say?
You're absolutely correct. Thank you for bringing me back to the basics. Yes, so generally the standard body for international tax rules is an organization based in Paris called the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. That was, by the way, incorporated and created in order to implement the Marshall Plan in the US. In Europe as a result of the Second World War. So the OECD is the leading organization in drafting international tax standards. It's the international tax standard setter. But now more and more, in order to see that the whole world has a voice, despite I think that the OECD give a voice to everyone, the United Nations is also coming up strong with its subcommittee. And then you have all this, I would say, bunch of satellite regional organizations, starting from the European Union, where we are, the European Commission, which draft rules for the European community. We have the African Tax Administration Forum in Africa. We have the CIAT, the Comitato Interamericano para la Administración Tributaria in Panama. So we have all these regional organizations that tend to align with the global standard setter, being the OECD and the UN, in order then to draft rules. So these are the players, the international bodies that set the framework of international tax rules.
And I guess through this cobweb of things, we also tend to figure out if we are overtaxing certain companies or stuff like that, right? Like, how do we coordinate this? You just mentioned complexity. Where to look?
Yeah, I think it's you hit the nail in the head with this question, because I would say that at the moment, coordination is what is lacking. So we are living in these times. These are very interesting and challenging times, because the international tax architecture strive for coordination, but de facto is in a moment of huge fragmentation. And why is that? Fragmentation exists because indeed key countries, United States, certain European countries like France, Italy, some African countries, they want their own little piece of the pie, being give me enough taxing rights to tax enough in my country. So I think at the moment specifically there is an input for coordination, and I will give you an example in a moment. But the implementation of the coordination is where the real problems are right now.
And what is the real example that you were thinking?
So as you know, I'm sure that you might have heard that as a result of the G20 request, the OECD produced a bunch of set of rules around a global corporate minimum income tax that basically require companies to pay a minimum of 15% effective tax rates on their corporate profits. This has been an effort which started at the OECD and currently is requested by the OECD to these countries to now be implementing in their own domestic laws. The thing is that while there is a huge amount of coordination, obviously there are another set of rules, for example, domestic accounting rules that kick in and can lead to different results. So while the coordination effort was pretty remarkable, there has been, I would say, a strong opposition, especially by some companies, even in Europe, that says, look, my effective tax rate is way above 15%. So why are you introducing to me these rules? Why are you requiring me to respect those rules? Where at the end of the day, then the compliance cost for me to respect those rules will be bigger than anything else. So when I used to work on Netflix, there was a very great expression that we use that was when you needed to take a decision, the question that we're asking you was, is the juice worth the squeeze? So if you ask me on Pillar 2, I'm not really sure that where we are today is an example where the juice was worth the squeeze, at least looking at the response by many multinational groups.
But you mean the compliance cost, the cost of paying lawyers, or the compliance cost, the actual tax?
The compliance cost that, let's say, if you are a very successful Swiss group producing very beautiful watches, they pay a lot of taxes. Of course, for that company, there will be a significant compliance cost, both to pay their own advisors to make sure that they can calculate the tax correctly, but also internal costs of compliance, because you will also need to adapt the systems, your own internal accounting systems to report to that.
So this is an example that you're giving me is to prevent under taxation. So everybody says a floor of 15.
Correct.
But companies complain because they say, we pay more anyway.
Some of them, they pay more and say, yes, or I'm already there. But in order to get there, also the additional burden that you're putting on me is too much. And again, I want to give you a very unbiased view here. But if I'm a company and on top of having this increased compliance cost, then I need to face scenarios where tax authorities around the world can come in with some audits to say, I want even more. Because let's say there is a specific concept in international taxation called permanent establishment, where some tax authorities come in and tell you, I don't think that you're paying enough to corporate profits. Let me create something more in terms of a taxable presence, or let me introduce some sort of taxes such as digital service taxes that in any case lead to double taxation. Eventually, these rules then have a detrimental effect to overall international trade because they lead to double or multiple taxation. So this is a problem because taxation has to occur only once.
Yeah. Now, to me, it seems like a great idea to put a minimum tax that, okay, everybody pays the same everywhere, and this looks simple, this looks... So to me, it's difficult to understand why companies will not attack double taxation on random things rather than just say, or even, I think that before Trump, there was also the US pushing for some minimum tax worldwide. I think Brazil was also one of the jurisdictions, correct me if I'm wrong, that wanted this policy to be set forward. And to me, as an Argentinian, for example, I also think of Uruguay, which is the Delaware of Latin America. I think that if all Argentinians repatriate their money from Uruguay, it becomes IT in no time. So all the wealth of Uruguay is mostly Argentinian savings. So to me, it's really something that I would really love to see, because it also creates more detrimental effects that some jurisdictions free ride.
I have a slightly different view here. Of course, I agree that having a minimum floor of 15% is important. But let me ask you, I think, again, going back to the basics. So if I'm a company and I'm rightly and duly taxed, I also want, on the other hand, tax certainty. Because if I am a publicly listed company, and if for whatever reason my name get, put in the first page of the Financial Times saying company X or company Y accused of tax avoidance, the value of the share goes down, so the reputational risk is as impactful as the financial risk. Now, to your example about Argentinian savings going to Uruguay, why is this happening?
Because Uruguayans don't charge them taxes.
Yes, my question is slightly, apologies, I don't want to answer, but why Argentinians feel the need to go to Uruguay? Because possibly, for example, I have no problem in paying as a European a sufficient amount of taxes, which is correct. But where do I have a problem in paying taxes? Sometimes I have a problem in paying too much taxes if I don't see what is the return that I get on the tax. So I know that it can sound a little bit unpopular, but
it's a self-defeating thought as well, right? Because Argentinians, I'm not getting taxed, so I don't pay. So everything gets more deteriorated.
But if I invest, for example, I had experiences. For example, you mentioned Argentina, that if I am, let's say, a US company and I set up a subsidiary in Argentina.
And you cannot take the money out.
And I cannot take the money
out.
A classic. It's a classic. And why this is happening?
But bad institutionality, of course.
Bad institutionality. So exactly. So I think we are fully aligned on that. So while I fully agree that these rules are needed, on the other hand, I think there is also, I would say, an elephant in the room which is never addressed, which is corruption. Let's call it for what it is. At the governmental level, lack of proper enforcement. There is enough money sometimes, but sometimes money is not always utilized for the right purposes. So we need to continue introducing enough rules to guarantee proper taxation, while this is not detrimental to guarantee sound investment, while also tackling scenario of corruption or bad administration that still, as of today, is still occurring.
I wonder, I don't know, because it's not my field, right? But there must be studies tracking like why people leave certain jurisdictions. Is it because of the high taxes alone or because of the uncertainty? In the US, it also happens, right? That they change states and more or less you have the same judicial system.
Yes, I think it's a combination of everything, in my opinion, because I left my country many years ago now. When I look at, let's say, any European Union country, so when you take a decision on leaving a country or not, there is not just the tax factor, it's the opportunity factor, it's the social component, it's the education system, it's the transportation system. So that's why when we started the conversation, it's like, I think tax is an element that in a sociological conversation around what makes a good state has to be taken into account together with other components. Because I give you another example because you are an expert there. When I wanted to set up my business in Abu Dhabi, I wanted to open a bank account also in the Netherlands with a Dutch entity. By the fact that I was a non-resident, I received a response by a bank after few months. I'm not gonna make the name of the bank to not vilify them, but I received a letter that said, yeah, maybe in the United Arab Emirates, maybe you do some dodgy services. So, and I can tell you that I hire a lot of people in the Netherlands. I disclose all the documentation that they requested me. So these are the things. This is, I think, an extreme example to tell you why am I leaving why I take into consideration to leave a country, especially a country as advanced as the Netherlands.
You're right, and this is such a hard conversation. And now going to tax exemption regimes.
Yes.
For example, there's these special zones of non-taxation that sometimes some countries create. I think there are extreme examples, but in Argentina we call it RIGI, Régimen de Incentivo a las Grandes Inversiones. So it's a regime to incentivize big investments. So what is the argument of the government? We have scammed investors for so long that now they don't want to come. So we need to promise them that we are not going to charge taxes for 30 years and they can come and take all the minerals. And I'm like, no, I mean, these people are making a lot of profit. What we should try to promise is that we will create enough consensus that we will respect whatever rule is in place.
Correct.
So to me, that's an over-exaggeration and something that creates even less legitimacy in the society, seeing that a mining company comes, takes all the minerals, leaves things destroyed, and then, and not paying their fair share in the place where they are doing the business.
But to your example, let's say if I'm a mineral company and I come to Argentina, so my first concern is if I'm the advisor of this company is, well, first and foremost, I want to make sure that the compliance with domestic obligation and domestic tax obligation are respected and met. This is one part of the story, though, because in your example, there are environmental concerns, there are legal concerns, there are regulatory concerns that you need to make sure that as a whole are respected. So I think sometimes it's a little bit too easy to put the blame and say, like, look, the tax, it has not been fair. If the tax is not fair, then change the laws. Then change the rules. And I think we are, at the international level at least, facing a moment where multilateralism is at its low. Sitting together and discuss is already a form of multilateralism, but are we in the phase then are you implementing the rules so that the perception is fair? Free economic zones are, as a result of this Pillar 2 global minimum income tax, obviously are disincentivized. However, I can give you example in many countries in the Middle East, a country like Turkey, for example, that right now has introduced a 20 years exemption plan if you decide to move certain businesses or certain activity in the country, provided that the amount that you are able to obtain by bringing this investment in the country is then recovered in a different way, then I think it's a system that could work. So I think it's a balancing exercise that when it comes to taxation, sometimes it's not always easy to grasp because there are a number of variables and components that are, especially again in the public domain space, when we talk about fairness, are not always immediately grasped.
And what do you think about the topic on individual taxation and then the new billionaires that are growing even larger in the world? And as far as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, the tax scheme that these people have is that they pay almost no taxes because they borrow on their stock. So basically, Elon Musk has a lot of stock from whatever company, Tesla, and then the bank says, this guy is going to be for sure able to repay this, so we're going to extend a loan, and then those loans are not taxes and not taxed and always roll over. So these guys pay no income tax, even though they are billionaires, trillionaires. Is that true?
Not necessarily, in the sense that, to your example, if I'm able to borrow money by basically pledging on my own stock, the issue is not tax. I think the issue that we are facing right now in terms of fairness is not a tax issue, but it's a corporate law issue. Think about the fact that most of the recent IPOs that we had refer to the fact that the shares of the founders, attributable to the founders, they are multiple vote shares that grant basically endless control to these people. So the issue is not just tax. Now, obviously, the way I treat debt versus equity from a tax standpoint also can contribute, because obviously, you mentioned Elon Musk. Obviously, Elon Musk can get access to more sophisticated form of tax planning. But if you look at the work that has been done by this international organization in the last 15 years with this project called BEPS, Base Erosion and Profit Shifting, there have been a number of significant limitations and boundaries that have been put to that.
But they can't do that, right? Borrow from the stock, because you're telling me the problem is not only that they can borrow, but that these are super stocks. And that they create lack of democracy, I would say, in a company.
Well, true, but it's again, this is not a tax issue. This is a corporate law issue.
But if they can borrow on their tax and not pay tax income like the rest of the mortals, then
they do pay tax. They do pay personal income tax. I think again, the way we are from a global personal income tax standpoint, we have a system whereby taxation of labor income is always greater than taxation of invested passive income. So capital gains or taxation of the return on specific investments. But these are clear policy decisions that come from the politicians in charge.
Exactly. And,
So-
my discussion is, are they fair? Because Elon Musk doesn't pay himself a salary from Tesla of billions
But
a year.
I
Right?
give you my own response to fairness.
Yeah.
You can have your role. I see where, from a moral standpoint, you say, okay, these guys are zillionaires, not even billionaires. And, compared to the ordinary blue collar employee, where is the balancing exercise? But if life, like tax, is also a matter of perspectives, in the sense that if these are the rules currently in place, and if the rules currently in place tell me that I can do it in a way that does not contravene the law, unless you're telling me this is aggressive tax avoidance and the government is free to challenge that, then I don't see where. So I think fairness, if you ask me, is comply with the law. Then of course there are boundaries to that.
Yeah, but if these guys also manage the politicians and the law, then they will make the laws for their own benefit. And the problem is that you cannot be a billionaire and not pay like a 50% tax. It shouldn't be allowed in the first place.
Are you referring to a specific country at the moment?
I mean, I don't know if there is much difference between Europe and the US in that regard. I think the US has probably more billionaires even. I don't know.
I think the problem that we are having in Europe, and sorry to be that blunt, is I think a tax system that is completely misaligned with the need of what a solid entrepreneurial business base is. I think I'm talking again. I try to take a more neutral view, and this is my, of course, subjective view, and I'm happy to be challenged on that. But while in Europe we are having people that are just building red tape, despite now the European Union try to come up with simplification rules that in any case will come in place possibly in 11 years from now, if they are approved. So good luck with that. On the other side of the ocean, of course, one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful player in the international tax rule is the United States, tend to basically devise tax provision where capital drives profitability and not labor. And for such a reason, I need to streamline and facilitate this to happen more and more. Is it fair? Is it fair? You and I can agree that this is something is not fair. But our opinion counts very little if this is not reflected on what the politicians want, because
but we need to know what we want to ask the politicians, right, for the benefit of the society. And I think that I'm fully on board with the little guy, and of course I will also like to know what can we do for the little guy that is doing an entrepreneur idea that needs to escalate. And we work with that a lot here also at the UI, in the Florence
yes,
the capital markets union, the banking union, etc. But in this case, I wonder what with those guys that are like really, really big. And there's a lot of debate about, for example, taxing unrealized gains. So basically when your stock goes up and then nobody pays taxes on that until they sell the stock. So these guys basically never sell their stock. And I think Kamala Harris, at some point when she was going against Trump, she also put forward this idea. She lost miserably because it's seen as a radical idea.
Again, I can give you another example that we have in Europe, in the Netherlands. If you own a real estate property and as a non-resident, you keep the property for yourself without generating any income, the tax authorities will come and say, I presume that there is a notional attribution of value to this apartment, I tax it. Isn't it these guys well taxed? I think so. And again, based on my own personal consideration of fairness, I say I have no problem with that. No problem. To the extent that the basic services are applied through everyone. But if I see that, for instance, if I need to send one child to a kindergarten, I need to pay 1,000 euros a month, or if safety is not guaranteed, or if there are scenarios where indeed services from the public sector are not coming, this is where I start to have a problem to pay that tax.
I think that's what the anarcho-capitalists also say when it comes to paying taxes. I had that discussion with the boss ticket person the other day because I enter and I paid when she was coming up because I just did one stop and I truly forgot. I said, okay, pay. And then we got into an argument in Italian and I say, and who pays me when the bus doesn't come? And she said, that's another discussion.
That's another discussion.
And I lost that discussion. I even went and set up a posta raccomandata, which is the email that you need to pay to communicate with the Italian system. My complaint went to the same bus authority and they say, you're wrong. So I lost legally.
So isn't it that this is not just a tax issue? Because at the end of the day, I think a fair system is a system where everyone is on a legal footing. And I think I can tell you what I see as the current functioning of the system right now. The current functioning of the system is right now is labor is more taxed than capital. Yeah, so who has capital? Especially in the United States.
Rich people.
Rich people gets along the way, but also people that have been working hard and then been putting savings on the side. Now, I don't think, again, the issue that I try to point attention on is while taxation has to be fair, also the implementation, which is the missing piece in the conversation, has to come into place. Because obviously, look also at the fact that, yes, you're telling me that multinational X does not pay enough taxes. But then if I look at the global picture and say, okay, how many employees this multinational has hired in that country? How much withholding taxes on the payroll income, which still goes into the state coffers, are being collected because of the activities in that company, then the narrative subtly changes. So I think at least this is what we try to do here at the UI with our postgraduate training at the School of Transnational Governance on global tax policy and sustainable governance. When we say that a tax system has to be sustainable, means that you need to look and assess it as a technician in a neutral way, in a way that both takes into account the right needs of a country with the legitimate needs of a multinational group for the sake of guaranteeing a well-nurtured and a well-sound and sustainable society.
Okay, that I will of course agree with that characterization. And with the companies, it's probably a different story. But I don't think that Elon Musk can complain, hey, the train is not coming. Come on, Elon Musk, just pay, man. He doesn't even donate. So those things, I think, make people perceive the tax system as very unfair. And connected to this, there's another debate, Gianmarco. Maybe you can help me
Of course.
Illustrate this if it works the same in Europe. But the basis of capitalism, why we accept that some people is richer than others, is because we want to acknowledge the merit of people creating something that other people really, really want. And then we say, okay, then you created this fantastic invention, get to be rich. But yet, that doesn't apply to the children of those people. These people has been taxed with inheritance tax for a long time, but yet we see those regulations apparently working less effectively. So if you are born rich, you are probably going to die rich, and there's nothing that you can do to change that, apparently. And that creates a sense of unfairness in society. Do you think we're doing enough in terms of inheritance tax?
It's a very good question. I think that it's a very good and difficult question to answer because applying the discussion around inheritance tax now has always been floating a little bit around for a while. I think that a proper sound response should be calibrated also depending on the type of society and country that you're looking for. This country, Italy, the vast majority of my generation is living still or enjoying still some, if not most, of the savings of their parents, of the earlier generation. Not necessarily doing much with that. Of course, I don't want to generalize, but it's a fair assumption. So If it's something that would be helpful, perhaps yes. But again, if I decide to go into a direction of a wealth tax or an inheritance tax, it's important that perhaps the missing piece right now is what is the gap, the financial structural gap that the money that I would be able to collect would be used for, would be utilized for. Because I can tell you when if I look, for instance, again at Italy, the level of tax collection is pretty on par with many other European countries. The problem is that if I go out there and then, depending on which part of Italy you are, sometimes you see some structural, I would say, gaps in terms of lack of hospitals or terrible roads or, salaries that are still stagnating. That means that possibly something that could be done with that money is not done properly. So I'm sorry if I go back there. So the conversation around inheritance tax at the moment is in debate. There are divergent views around the world. With the current political climate throughout Europe and around the world, I don't think that much is going to happen, but I'm happy to be proven wrong.
But you think something needs to be reformed there?
I think we need to have a proper conversation about it. Because I think for proper conversation about it, for me, means first and foremost, what's the issues that you are trying to solve? Which is, do we have a tax gap? If the answer is yes, where does this tax gap, what creates this tax gap? Number three, once we have identified that we have a problem and introduce a wealth tax or an inheritance tax, what I'm going to do with that money? Because you don't only have an inheritance tax, you also have a gift tax, when most countries don't utilize.
Yeah.
But again, I'm saying this because, of course, every tax that is, for example, another big conversation that we're having right now that I personally fully support is a sugar tax. So I want to tax more, like we accept to pay more on excise because we want to smoke cigarettes. Why I cannot pay more now? I know that I'm going to drink, let's say, a sugar soft drink. Now more and more countries are thinking about it in Europe. So this is where the society, this is where we entrust our politicians to go in a certain direction. But I think that the missing piece is also, this is also a paradox that I'm saying. Now more and more, we see, for example, both individuals and companies to disclose more transparently. For example, did you know that in Sweden, if you want, you can check publicly how much your neighbor earn?
I heard that.
Yeah. So why do I do that? Do I do that because I just want to create a sense of evenness, or just because I want to be, I don't know, sneezing into someone else's affair? Or is because I want I want to convey a broader message of alignment, transparency, and integrity. This is not for me and you to say on a standalone basis, but through our votes, we can say to our politician, I think you should do it, or no, I think you shouldn't do it.
And I wonder, Gianmarco, I have just two more questions and I let you go, but
Please.
One that is very itching for many European countries, if you would ask, for example, the Portuguese or people who have beautiful countries in general, and they are getting tired of this story of the digital nomads. They get a paycheck from the US, they live in Lisbon, they don't pay for the public services, and people feel upset about it.
Again, also here we need to be a little bit clear. So we got 3 points on digital nomads.
Okay.
Point number one, this is, as a result of COVID, this is the new, it's a fact of society that people look at job and a job place differently. Today, you can be here in Villa Salviati, and then you say, look, you know what, I want to run some of my podcasts out of Cordova, in Argentina, and then you say, look, I want to go now then 6 months in Bangkok because I want to do a project around the banking supervision, comparative studies in Bangkok. This is a fact. Now, the fact that on where you decide to live, there we have clear rules, more or less. The clear rules are, if you, let's say, your example of the Argentinian that wants to enjoy Lisbon, but not paying taxes. Well, if I'm living there, I will be considered resident for tax purposes, so I have to pay taxes over there. But then if I start to play around, then perhaps the system of international taxation is currently being conceived. Second point around the notion of residence, but now the concept of residence is very much blurred. So possibly we will need to find ways to reconsider this, also in a way that allows people to move freely, but also to have states not to to lose taxable revenue. The OECD and the United Nations are working hard at the moment on how to find solutions to the taxation of digital nomads, because it's not also a tax consideration. There are also social security issues attached to it,
of course,
which are very important.
Gianmarco, the classical question: what's going to happen with taxes and AI? How is it going to affect? Is it going to be easier to put our taxes together? Are the governments going to be more powerful? What do you envision?
I read a very interesting article the other day. For those of you who are listening to this podcast, I recommend it. It's called The Information Paradox. It's an article that has been written by an American economist that says, we are now living in a life where basically with the data I feed the system, then with my prompts, I'm getting my service provider to get better. So the situation is that the buyer of the service is the one that actually providing the information to guarantee that service and still has to pay for it. Right? Because, depending on how good or how bad the response, how much you correct your AI agent, then the model gets better and better. Now, according to the current tax rules, I think there are already ways where we can tax these new systems. I think in terms of ordinary supply chain development, it's not that different than before. But also here, we need to be very careful to not limit the conversation just to tax. I'll give you a concrete example. So if you take Europe, for example, already in Europe, thanks God, with improved life expectancy, we are more people that are moving into retirement phase. We have less and less children. So we have, taking this country, Italy, we are at material demographic fall. So we have, going forward, we will have less income producing individuals, but there we will be more and more consumption.
Yeah.
If on top of that, you consider that then you will have AI agent that potentially will replace, right, the normal individual skilled employee, who is going to pay for our taxes? So what I'm saying is, tax-wise, we can certainly find an answer because there are a lot of technically skilled people and a solution can be found. But with artificial intelligence, I think there are first and foremost some philosophical questions that we need to be intellectually honest enough to address. And those are societal one. The role of data, which has been the subject of contention, of discussion. Are we ready to sit together and say, rules that were developed 100 years ago can apply consistently to models where now I can give a proper prompt to my laptop and basically get something out of it with my own information? Not easy. I think especially how to look into artificial intelligence is going to be the debate of the next 10 years.
So for you, the question is more or less, how do we tax these companies that are also...
I think these companies are already paying taxes. So it's not that these companies are escaping taxation.
No. I imagine that.
What I'm saying is the more long-term policy effects of saying, in a scenario where, and I'm afraid, generally I'm a big optimist. I'm a big optimist on that. But I look especially at the younger generation, right? I have friends who are teachers in schools and say, look, kids now 15, 16 years old, they put their prompt on their AI agent, being ChatGPT or Claude, and they stop thinking because someone else is doing it. So this is, in my opinion, before jumping into the tax and solution that we will be also want to be addressed, is an existential, sustainable one.
Yeah.
And
But it's also true that these companies and these models, as you say, when you prompt them, they improve and they improve with our own work. That's a difficult thing because they are really valued.
this is why it's an information paradox.
Yeah.
Because maybe you come to me and say, okay, Gianmarco, you are a tax lawyer. Can you tell me how to pay taxes in Italy or in Argentina or in the United Arab Emirates? I can provide you an answer. That's okay. But if now you are, as a consumer, you're going to pay to receive a service, which, let's say, large language models, because of your input, will get better. Are we sure that then the current framework as we have is enough?
That's a hard question. But now we
Sorry, and I didn't give you the proper answer to this.
Nobody really knows. But now we're going to close with what we normally do at the end, which is bringing up what's the strangest thing that you saw this week. I can start.
Please.
I struggle to take my mind out of the World Cup. And I think that so many things have happened in this World Cup. We're going to do a dedicated episode in this show about it. But I'm surprised about how many conspiracy theories can flourish as long as any country wins, because we are losing trust in the institution. So there's nothing to mediate in between. Probably it relates to this taxes question as well. Because when we start to think like, yeah, but I'm paying taxes, but nothing is coming in return, it's the same like, yeah, but Spain won, but maybe FIFA asked Argentina to give up the World Cup because they made a claim on the Malvinas Islands. So they rebelled against the power. So that's what we are saying now, because before it was Argent FIFA, now it's Espan FIFA. And I think that the crazy conspiracy theories that we went into in this World Cup was too much for me to process.
Yeah, it's a good one. The strangest thing, or maybe the scariest thing I saw this week actually was actually yesterday.
Okay.
When I was in a train station, and there was a kid. I think it was in one of these bookstores that you have in the station.
Yeah.
And there was a kid that approached the bookstore, and he was starting to just flip through the pages of a book. And the father came there and say, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "Okay, let's go." Like, rather than I shouldn't laugh about it. Rather than incentivizing the kid to stay there, I said, let's go. We need to eat, right?
Yeah.
So that goes into the fact that maybe sometimes I think I always ask myself, maybe I'm overthinking things. I shouldn't let it go, but it was pretty shocking.
Pretty eloquent. I think
Pretty eloquent.
Society is getting destroyed in some way.
Yes. Unfortunately,
it is what it is. Gianmarco, thank you very much for coming. We have to score now the strangest fact of the week. I think I will put my fact an 8, because maybe there's no conspiracy in the World Cup, but I doubt it. And Gianmarco, you brought us a fact that is strange, but I think it's more common nowadays, so I put you an 8. Now you have to score mine. You have your numbers there.
Okay. I think I would score your at 9.
Oh.
Because I think that especially these are the type of events that right now, also because I think the people involved, from the president of the United States to the president of FIFA, tended to maybe overinflate this conversation. Mine, I would score it a 5.
A 5. Oh.
5.
Well, I guess I won, so I'm gonna take the strangest prize of the week, which is I will take home this barbaric guy that you can see in this camera, and Gianmarco, you take the less strangest prize, which is going to be your token for coming to this show.
Oh, okay. Well, of course, I'm gonna take a nice car that can drive me back to Rome. Thank you for having me.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Gianmarco. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for listening to us.